Listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome. My name is Christine Perret, and I'm very pleased to be here today with other panelists. And we're going to be conducting the January 20th webinar on the topic of augmented reality success, focusing specifically on managing enterprise AR project risks. I want to set the stage for a few minutes by explaining to you that this is the fourth in a series that the area has been conducting, a series of webinars. Starting last fall, we introduced ourselves in a webinar with some members. We also had members sharing with us the motivations for introducing enterprise augmented reality. And in November, more of our experts, area members, were speaking about use case selection. So we're going to be continuing with these webinars on a monthly basis. And in fact, want to mark your calendars. So one of those will be coming up in the middle of February. Now I'd like to go ahead and introduce myself a little bit more and share with you some of the foundations of the AR for Enterprise Alliance. I'm the executive director of this organization, and I joined and am partnering with others because I feel very strongly that augmented reality can improve workplace performance. By building upon existing enterprise information systems, augmented reality can help visualize information in real time. Not just any information, the most relevant information, that which is fresh and contextual and presented in a manner that's very efficient. By having connected devices and augmented reality enabled systems, we also believe that we can use enterprise resources more effectively. Partly that can be human resources, such as having experts at the disposal of people who are in the field or on the factory floor, and helping them quickly resolve issues and continue with their work. We also have observed that when people use augmented reality assisted systems, they can reduce risk by increasing the capturing and the recording of tribal knowledge, experts doing a particular job, and then also certifying using video and captured data from sensor-rich devices to certify the achievement of the accomplishment and compliance with policy. In addition, augmented reality can be very valuable for bringing work instructions to the worker's view and perhaps their ears in real time, especially when they have tasks that they're not that familiar with. They may be rare tasks or done just uniquely, and they may be complex tasks. And this having augmented reality accessible can reduce the time to perform rare and complex tasks. By having available fresh, relevant data, experts at our disposal, and precise instructions, we can expect a reduction in errors that might be a result of humans not having enough experience or not making informed decisions because they don't have the information they need. By reducing time and reducing errors, as well as increasing resource utilization and compliance, we believe that enterprise augmented reality will also help companies reduce costs, that they will actually have more efficient systems and more efficient companies, that the cost savings far exceed or generously exceed the costs of putting enterprise augmented reality in place. So through these benefits, we believe AR can boost operational efficiency. Our vision is this doesn't happen overnight. And together, there is this global member-based organization helping to accelerate AR adoption in the enterprise. Now, we started with customers at the table. They're the ones who have assets and they have time-critical procedures, and really some great opportunities to put augmented reality to the test and to prove and to benefit from those operational efficiencies I spoke about a minute ago. But they need the cooperation and partnership with providers of components, systems, and services that provide them solutions. In many cases, custom solutions, and gradually over time, those solutions will be more modular, more I guess I could say, easily integrated into existing enterprise IT. And at the table, when we started this organization, there were, and there are today non-commercial entities. These are the organizations that are research centers, research institutes, universities, standards organizations, and industry trade groups that help to, if you will, solve some of the problems that both customers and providers share. And together, these three segments, the customers, providers, and non-commercial entities, are the basis of a vibrant new technology ecosystem. And the mission of the area is to help those organizations, not only our members, but also those more broadly, all organizations that can benefit to achieve that operational efficiency through smooth introduction and eventually the widespread adoption of interoperable AR-enabled systems. Our members include customers from these industries, as you can see on the left-hand side of my slide, and from provider segments, such as those on the other side of the slide, and I already mentioned examples of the non-commercial entities. So the logos of our current members appear on this slide, and they are also on our website. There's a lot of information about each of our members, their reasons for joining, and supporting this important organization. Now let's turn our attention to today's webinar. I'm going to begin by introducing the topic of risks and risk mitigation by giving you a presentation. And then I'll be joined by three panelists, Barry Poe from Ingrain, Pete Wassell from Augmate, and Josh Kavavel from US Navy. All right, so the topic today is how to plan for success, especially the successful introduction of augmented reality. And I don't want to overemphasize that there are too many risks or that there are enormous risks. Simply believe we need to acknowledge what they are and be able to look at them and manage them better. So that's going to be the topic that we'll focus on today. As I said, I'll be speaking about a classification system that I've developed that helps us to identify the risks that are anticipated or frequently encountered. And then I'll be speaking a little bit about how to assess their importance, the importance of these factors in a project more specifically. And then I'll give you some recommendations about how to manage those risks before they have negative impacts. So now let's look at the classes of potential risks when you're introducing augmented reality in the enterprise. I like to think of risks in four categories. I think of these as being quite different, as you can see on this wheel, but they're also really part of a system, and they're interlocking. And sometimes we can address one type of risk or one specific risk that's clear, and it can increase the impact of another risk. Or you can also sometimes address two risks in different buckets at the same time. So it's important to examine them closely, but not think of them as being totally isolated from one another. First, there's always the technological risks in a new industry, in a new technology like that we have here. As we know, the complexity of the task of enterprise augmented reality is quite high, and so the The computation is challenging, requires large size of devices, and sometimes those are heavy. Sometimes the technologies are not very tolerant of changes in environmental conditions. And there may also be interferences from our environment. I'm thinking here there might be some network congestion. There might be changes in lighting conditions that cause objects to be less easy to see and therefore to detect. And then there would be a problem with their operation. Sometimes, as I mentioned, the network can cause problems all by itself, but there may also be issues with device-to-device connectivity. There may be problems with lack of systems integration or low interoperability with your existing systems. And all these can sometimes be a real drain on your battery. The second category of risks are around usages and users. I mentioned before that the systems, if they're very complex and heavy, maybe too heavy to carry or hold in one hand, or even if you put them on your head in a head-mounted display, a hands-free display, that might produce heat or not be well balanced. And we're not sure always how to assess the usability. What do we call this? Ease of use. You're having to learn so many new things to use augmented reality in this new manner. There may be some problems with latency, and we may need to train people on how to not only use it, but also to integrate it with their existing practices. And there's a variety of safety issues. Having cables or having other devices involved might put users at risk. And this is exactly an example of this overlapping of issues when you have sometimes a risk. You can run into regulatory or corporate policies. A lot of businesses have policies that do not permit new or wearable interfaces in their premises. And so we might have to think of new ways to evolve those policies. We don't know exactly how to measure the effectiveness of augmented reality, so we don't know against what metrics are we being measured. And there may be many stakeholders that need to review and approve new technologies. New technologies may need to be certified or to have some kind of standard procedures. And once again, coming back to compliance with those policies of the enterprise. And then the fourth risk is on the subject of the costs, financial risks. Sometimes there's a lot of uncertainty around what the components are going to cost, what the integration and service costs might be. We're not sure what the business models are for the providers of these technologies. And once again, back to safety, risks may be encountered. So who has responsibilities? Do we need to increase our insurance policies and take other steps to lower those liabilities? I mentioned before that many of the next generation systems are going to be relying on hands-free displays. And just to mention a few of the potential safety risks that those introduce, if the visualization is very opaque, it might not be possible for the user to see their real world, and so, or there might be an obstruction due to a part of the glasses preventing people from seeing an oncoming vehicle or something that they might need to pay attention to. Of course, we don't know about the risks due to radiation and heat and weight. Cables might get in the way. How do we drive with these devices? And in environments where there are explosive materials, those might also need to be intrinsically safe devices. And regardless of whether using a hands-free display or a tablet, there could be some safety concerns due to just being distracted or looking at another object at the same time when you're trying to look at the physical world. There might be fatigue, or if systems are not delivering the freshest or the best information, and we assume them to be doing that, we could have problems there as well. So, how important are these problems I've just mentioned? Well, it depends on every different situation, and there's so many variables. It's very difficult to quantify. But I think what we could do at the beginning is say that there are qualitative measures of risk. For example, if a particular project is um, not going along as smoothly as everyone expects, then there could be some political risks, or people would feel less confident about a project manager. They may also feel less confident in using this technology in the future if they experience some risk or some disappointments. Furthermore, there are things we can quantify, quantitative measures of risk. We can look at over what period of time the risk might be present. Is there a delay in a project? By how much? What is tolerable? And what level of frequency might be encountered, or risk might be encountered? How big a risk is it? Are we looking at a lot of money or a lot of equipment, a lot of people, a lot of conditions that it could be changed? And then what about opportunity risk? What could I be doing with my time if I'm not using or testing augmented reality systems? Maybe I would be productively doing my job. It's important to think of all of those components holistically. And this is just one of the many considerations that one learns when studying the topic of risk management, how all those different pieces of the puzzle fit together and they have to be balanced. So, how do we balance and manage and mitigate those risk factors in a project? There really isn't one right way or just one size fits all. It's very, very difficult to make generalizations because the conditions in the industries differ. Different companies have different tolerance to risk and different histories with the introduction of information technology. There are also differences in use cases uh, with respect to how much exposure to risk there is. My recommendations, and I'll be discussing these with our panelists, are that people should think about this in advance and proactively start to describe and prioritize those risks as early as possible without overemphasizing them, of course. That there are many people who have recent experiences in other technology introduction initiatives, such as enterprise mobility introduction, and there might be some lessons we can learn from those. We'd also like to develop new scenarios and overall think like a risk manager. Let me get into a little more detail on each of those before I go on. So, internally, when you're starting a project, you might want to document and prioritize what is the level of tolerance that you have for going over or under budget. Hardly ever go under budget. It's generally over budget. So, what is your tolerance, and then how many people are involved? Are there a large number of people that might be impacted, or a small number? That's one of the ways of documenting and prioritizing risks. You might also want to look at how much equipment and material and time, very usually limited resources that you want to put into a project, and then how much sensitive or strategic company data is involved. That might be another way of segmenting this. Is your brand at risk? And are you exposing any of your partners to the same risks or different risks than those you have and are willing to tolerate? The second suggestion or recommendation is to extend learnings from recent technology introductions. In mobility, for example, we've learned that we can put in place some geofencing technologies. You can turn cameras on and off. Radios can be adjusted following certain configurations. Uh, there are other devices for dangerous and explosive environments, such as oil and gas and chemical environments, where we do have to use intrinsically safe devices. So there are some learnings there that could be relatively quickly applied to our current situation. And then, speaking of another extension of our recent experience with mobility and mobile data, there are parameters, there are steps that people take to secure their mobile data. And we want to see to what extent those apply to augmented reality. You might want to encrypt data, to take measures to verify the devices are in fact safe and identified, authenticated devices, that there's not been any interruption of messages and any exposure to other threats, and maybe be able to obtain and use these unalterable device IDs as we have with mobile devices in enterprise. My third recommendation is to develop new scenarios. I mean this in terms of developing new scenarios for how your project might evolve. Um, in some cases, with very new technologies and users that are inexperienced, there may be some benefit to having someone who's a risk manager or scenario planner come in and develop new scenarios in partnership with your stakeholders. Document what those scenarios might look like, and maybe even try on a few for size to see what are the impacts, and then maybe repeat those and try on a new scenario another day as part of an exercise with your team members. Then regularly ask your management in particular and the users as well, to what extent are they feeling the risk, and do they feel comfortable with it or not? The fourth and final recommendation is to think like a risk manager. Now, I'm not a risk manager professionally, but I did study a little bit of this topic, and I believe that there are some really, really valuable lessons and techniques that are part of this discipline. Identifying, assessing impacts, prioritizing. These are topics I've already covered. And then I think that there are techniques for tracking these and making sure that the mitigation steps are being followed. And it's not just a matter of lip service being paid, but really, truly following through on any critical risks. So when I was putting this presentation together and thinking closely about this topic, I was also speaking with some experts about kind of asking them the open-ended question, what do you think is the biggest risk that we might incur? And it was suggested to me that, in fact, one of the important risks I have that follows maybe other thought in this discipline of augmented reality is that people might have expectations that are higher than the technology can meet. And as we've heard for now the last 6 months or so, Gartner puts augmented reality as being kind of in the low point, or maybe descending into the low point of this trough of disillusionment. I think that's very difficult to position it precisely. That's not the intent of this graphic or this process that Gartner undertakes each year, but to more at a conceptual level understand that we are reaching some maturity, but there's a high risk for people to be disappointed. So we need to do what we can to develop good plans, good workflows to share and to follow for the introduction projects. Once again, I don't think that all of these risks apply to augmented reality in general. It's more how to manage them on a project by project basis. And it's important for us, even though we are want to appear very confident and very bullish about augmented reality, to recognize that there are times when it's not going to be easy. And we need to establish those realistic goals. Usually, working with small numbers is a little easier, and being prepared to revise our goals if and when needed. That includes when you get feedback from your users after testing, and then being able to integrate that feedback to adjust the goals. And I think one of the very sound recommendations that I heard from the network of experts I work with is that we need to remember to keep the person, the human, the user in control of this process, because they fundamentally, the users, are the ones who this is supposed to be helping, and who we are confident will have adjustments to make going forward. This ends the prepared remarks that I have for today's webinar. Now I'm going to begin to introduce the panelists. Actually, I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves briefly, and then we have some questions we'll go through for about 20-25 minutes. And if you have any questions, you can put them into the GoToWebinar interface. There is a little user interface there where you can type your question in, and we'll be able to see that more easily. So Barry, would you please introduce yourself to our attendees?
Absolutely, Christine. Hello, everyone. My name is Barry Poe, and I am Head of Product Marketing and Business Development here at Engrain. For those of you who may not have heard of Engrain, we are an industrial augmented reality company. Been around for the better part of about 15 years, but really focused on AR over the last 5 or so years. Certainly have a really strong footprint in verticals like aerospace and defense, energy, manufacturing, and healthcare. And really pleased to have an opportunity to be here to share a little bit of insight into where AR projects could be a little bit more successful in terms of planning for risk.
Thanks, Barry. Pete, could you introduce yourself?
Sure, Christine. My name is Pete Wassell. I'm the founder and CEO of Augmate. I appreciate everyone attending this webinar, and for Christine for inviting me. Augmate has a platform for wearables that does device management, user management, over-the-air updates, policy and security for enterprises.
Thank you, Pete. Josh, could you please introduce yourself? Hi, Josh. Can you introduce yourself? We're not hearing you yet. Okay. I'm sorry, we've been experiencing some audio difficulty there from Josh's side. Maybe he'll... Oh, how about now?
Can you hear me now?
I can.
All right. I had 2 mute buttons, and I had unmuted one of them and not the other. So I work for the U.S. Navy. I've been interested in augmented reality since about 2012 when I was in a meeting where we were discussing how you learn what sailors need. And one of the things that came up in that was a discussion where we found out that one of the things that sailors most request is for some type of enhanced visualization. So I started looking into, well, what would that entail and how would you do that? And found a bunch of stuff happening in the area. So I started proposing some ideas. One of the things that I started working on after that point was a project with the CNO's Rapid Innovation Cell. The Chief of Naval Operations is the highest ranking Navy officer, and he has a group of junior officers and enlisted who come up with project ideas. One of their ideas was related to augmented reality, and so I started working with them on that. I've also started a community of other folks in the Navy who are interested in augmented reality, but I would say that the Navy is still sort of looking toward the future of risks. There haven't been too many large AR projects that have been done yet, so I do have some insight into some of the risks that we need to sort of prepare for as we try to get AR into the Navy.
Thanks. So I think we'd like to start by discussing and asking each of you your opinions about the wheel that I showed, the 4 risk categories, just to review the technological risks, usage or user risks, regulatory or corporate policy risks, and the final one, financial risks. Which of those categories do you think is the most important, or do you think comes up the most often? Barry, could you give us your thoughts on that based on your experience with these projects?
Yeah, absolutely, Christine. And I don't mean for this to sound like a bit of a cop-out, but I would say that all 4 quadrants of risk are equally important because they all contribute to the overall success or failure of an enterprise project of any kind, especially when you're evaluating a new technology like AR.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's probably, related to the quadrants of risk, it's really important to be able to clarify the outcomes or the intended use of augmented reality and being really clear about that, because that will ultimately inform where the risk points are in an AR project. And having that clarity up front really helps narrow down and provide focus in terms of both where AR can have benefit, but also where where the focus in terms of looking at where AR could be implemented as part of a project could potentially go. So from that perspective, I'd say that there has to be kind of a good sense of what you want to do with AR, and that will ultimately inform where you need to consider
Mm-hmm.
all the various points of risk in a particular project.
Okay. Okay. That's great. I appreciate that holistic view that you share. Pete, how about you? Do you think that there's one that's more important?
Well, from our perspective, we're typically brought in when I think the financial and regulatory parts are kind of already considered. So there's been either a business case established or some return on investment. The company knows the problem that they're trying to solve. So for me, it's really the technology and usage that I think is really the categories that are most appropriate. And so from that, what I mean is picking the device. We mostly work with digital eyewear. So there's monocular devices, there's binocular devices, size considerations, weight considerations, the operating system or features or functionality that exists on the device. Even knowing things like how important is voice recognition or
Mm-hmm.
gesture technology, battery life. All of those things are really critical. So oftentimes we'll get to a pilot and the company will have multiple sets of digital eyewear because they're still trying to establish which one is going to work the best.
Yeah, that can get really hairy. I think you. So to summarize what you said in a way, the list of technological risks is a very long one, and the technology is not mature all at one time, so it's so varied within that group that it's difficult to manage it. Would you
Yeah,
say?
absolutely. And there's ancillary kind of issues. For example, is there a management system for the devices? We've seen companies spring up like Rochester Optical, and they provide RX or prescription lenses for digital eyewear. So all of these other parts have to be considered
Mhm.
when you're picking that technology.
There's always something new coming in the technology domain, right? I mean, finance people still want to manage money. We know how to how to prioritize that. Josh, do you have something you'd like to add? Is there a category of risk here that's from the Navy's point of view supreme, or or just a
So,
showstopper?
yeah, from my perspective, I think the usage is the key risk. And maybe as some of you have more mature processes and applications, that has already been sort of mitigated that risk. But I think that's the big thing is how does this actually help complete some sort of job, or how does it affect mission effectiveness. And then after that, I would say regulatory risk, especially in the Navy, is one of the big factors. That's going to extend the challenge or increase the potential barrier for implementing this type of a solution, probably more so than most other industries.
Right.
I would say technology risk is would come in third, and that is because this is new. You know, as has already been mentioned, there's a lot of things that need to go into the whole system. It's not just the eyewear, it's not just the software. There's a whole ecosystem that needs to be sort of coordinated, and a system level approach is often systems engineering needs to happen with this stuff. In financial, that as long as the usage and the regulatory and the technology is ready, I think the financial piece will follow, because there is so much money invested in doing some of this work that if you can make a good case that there's a return on investment after a small amount of capital that's put into this, then I think that you can make a good case for it.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's you each had different perspectives, which is very good. So Josh, in the Navy, are there AR project managers? I mean, is that a title that you've seen assigned to anyone, or not yet?
No, there's many of you are probably familiar with the AITT, which is the Augmented Immersive Trainer that Dr. Peter Squire at ONR is running. I would say in the Navy, and actually he works with the Marine Corps, he's the one who's been funding augmented reality in that for an actual project. So he's come the closest to being.
Is he using something to measure or manage risks, or have you ever heard him or seen anything about that topic in his ONR?
No, I haven't seen him talk about that.
Well, maybe he will in the future. I mean, that's going to be something to look for. Or you could ask him. Pete,
I could, yeah. He might have been a good panelist.
Yeah. Pete, have you seen AR managers talk, or have they talked with you about risk management in their projects? Does anyone bring that up?
They have. First, I think I'd like to kind of put it in perspective. We keep in mind AR is a tool. There's saws, there's drills. It's obviously a technically advanced kind of tool, but it's still a tool. And I try to frame it as, what problem does it solve? What pain goes away from using the technology? What's the value proposition? Are we creating things that, are we making things more efficient or more accurate? So I kind of start there. Oftentimes when we get to a pilot site, on the first day, you're really considering defining KPIs, baseline metrics, measures of success, those types of things. And then along the way, if it's an 8 to 10 week pilot, let's say, you're getting user satisfaction, department satisfaction, company satisfaction to see if you're solving the problem, you're really hitting those measures of success. And you kind of create an iterative loop of adjusting and tweaking the application along the way during the pilot.
And that's a way of managing the technological and expectations risks. That's exactly what we were speaking at the end there in my presentation, saying being able to work with small groups iteratively, keeping that goalpost flexible to adjust it as you make progress, where and when you do move forward. But then you've got to step back if you run into problems. Yeah. Barry, do you work with a lot of AR project managers in ingrained customers, and have you seen anyone take on or address risk in the way we're talking about it?
Absolutely, Christine. Absolutely. In fact, I was just working with a customer just yesterday who was very interested in helping to identify and manage risk points. And so I think this is a kind of a very timely conversation from that perspective. I would say that, and I think you put it well, Christine, that the objective of kind of managing risk for a lot of these companies who are interested in exploring AR ends up this ends up being a bit of an exercise in managing expectations. And so one of the things that I have seen AR project managers do as we work with them here at Engrain is ultimately help them clarify for themselves, what is the ultimate benefit, what's the ultimate ROI, and also give them a very clear understanding of what is and what is not possible with the technology.
Mm-hmm.
So, they are project managers themselves. They may actually have a very good sense of what the technology can do because they've been exposed to it and they have been working with it for quite some time. But many of their stakeholders may not necessarily have the same level of exposure to AR, so many of them may have heard things that may or may not be true. So one of the things that becomes very important for them is to also manage the message of what the technology is capable of doing, what its current maturity level is, and ultimately, what a project in AR looks like, in that many of them are not going to push for an operational deployment or push for that in the short term. They really want to make sure that stakeholders recognize that these projects are often exploratory in nature, so that there's ultimately less risk than perhaps some of their stakeholders may initially perceive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's really very well put, and I'm glad to hear that people are thinking that way, and it's what I've heard from my side as well. Let's move to our third questions. Um, are there some lessons that you, as being in those trenches, have learned from other initiatives? So I know you've learned a lot from just working with the AR project managers, supporting those people, um, listening to the users. But can we step up or back a ways and think about other initiatives that you've been part of in your professional life that Pete, do you have some examples that you wanted to raise for this?
Sure. And the biggest one is really from MDM, mobile device management. Um, so a number of years ago, smartphones were being introduced to the enterprise, and there were a number of issues and hurdles that they had to overcome. So not unlike wearables, um, AR for, let's say, tablets and also digital eyewear, um, the IT departments, in my experience, have been um, the biggest hurdle. And rightfully so. They're kind of a gatekeeper, and there's good reason why they give pushback, right? There's cameras on these devices, so someone could take a picture inside the facility and tweet it, let's say, one of their workers. There's issues of how the devices get charged. Is there some sort of sign out or library system? How do you share devices? What's the
This is
security
all
like?
around smartphones and tablets. Those are some of the we had those exact same issues to address. That's what you're saying, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Downloading applications that might not be appropriate for the workplace, or taking home the device, all those types of you learn from the past to make things better with this technology.
Okay. Um, Josh, have you been part of other technology introductions, either in the Navy or in other parts of your life, maybe as a sailor, um, where you learned some critical lessons that you could apply to augmented reality introduction?
I think the thing that comes to mind most with any initiative, something new that you're trying to introduce, is to just be persistent.
Mm. and and are you going to stop there, or what you're saying
I
is
mean, I
just
think
be
I know
stubborn?
that sounds like, maybe it's too simple, but I think that shows that's what makes successful initiatives, is if you believe in something, you believe that it's the right thing to do. It will benefit your company or someone, then you just keep trying. There's going to be some failures with risks, no matter how hard you try to mitigate them. So you try find a way to pivot and you keep going.
I understand. I understand. Barry, how about you? Have you where could you have some lessons that you've picked up that you're applying today?
I really like what Josh just said about making sure that there's room for failure, because I think that that is definitely an important component of these AR projects in terms of us going forward. In terms of the market going forward, it is interesting. Many of the projects that we work in, especially kind of when we get initial engagement, one of the things that comes to my mind is the importance of being able to separate out the needs of the buyer from the needs of the end user. So one of the things that we always try to do here at Engrain is make sure that we don't just understand, things from perhaps a buyer perspective, or the people who kind of have the finances to be able to go and fund a project, but also really understand the people who are going to ultimately directly benefit from AR. The people who are out in the field, who are going to be wearing those smart glasses or perhaps using those mobile devices to actually do things with AR. It is very important to capture their needs, the way that they work, because you all often kind of uncover the fact that the needs of the buyer are often very independent of the needs of the end user, and it's very important to have, in order for a project to be successful, that you actually have elements of both captured in whatever solution is being considered for deployment.
Yeah, very good. Excellent. So our last question is around risk mitigation strategies that you've seen, that you particularly want to embrace, or you want to remind us. This is kind of where we're gonna. This is our last prepared question, and then we'll be taking a couple of questions from the audience. So attendees, if you have any questions, please do enter them into the go-to webinar for that purpose. So Barry, let's come back to you. You've already said some of the things that you've mentioned some. Do you have any more? What about giving courses, sort of group instruction about augmented reality? You talked about managing expectations. Is that something that you do? You help your customers with to set
Definitely, Christine.
expectations?
Yeah, certainly. We definitely go through exercises and work with many of those customers to clarify for themselves where they see the benefit. Many of them, they'll come to us with perhaps blurry expectations of what AR can do, or where they feel AR could have benefit. And just working with them by also just better understanding their business context and where they want to go. Is definitely a good way to help them clarify their goals and their objectives by taking on board AR as a technology. And I think, as Pete kind of put it, it's also very valuable to make sure that they understand that AR is just a tool, and it's what you want to do that's ultimately much more important than the underlying technology. So that's one side of it. The other thing I might say is that from a risk mitigation perspective, one thing that we found that's very effective is, participatory engagement across all the stakeholders. So not kind of having, Engrain or any vendor kind of build a solution in isolation. I think you do get a lot more buy-in in AR when you get all of the stakeholders to participate in the design and development of a solution. So that's also one of the things that we really try to do here at Engrain, is make sure that the people who are part of a project all have more than just a voice, in that they're actually actively participating in the evolution and design of a solution that would end up in their business.
They have a responsibility in something that they've helped to design, so they have a stake in its success.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Pete, you could tell us about geofencing, or systems that turn on and off, or that manage bandwidth or manage battery. Are those some of the techniques for reducing risk that you recommend?
I do, and part of our platform does those things. So even at a pilot stage, and that's probably one of the biggest lessons. Really starting out slow, you can take a phased approach or a phased rollout to implementing AR. I think really in the beginning, it's a hardware and software evaluation. It's usually one person at a company that's determining what's a good fit, and communication back to those software providers and hardware providers. And what I mean by good fit, not with digital eyewear, just how it fits, but is it a good fit for the use case, for the workers, those types of things. People can start with non-live data. They can start with without the technology integrating to a back-end ERP system, just with kind of dummy data or fake data. It's important to work out the kinks or bugs early.
Right. Not everybody needs to be using 3D models the first project they do.
Exactly. So I think if it's thoughtful and you start out slow and have that iterative feedback with making improvements along the way is really the best approach. And some of that was mentioned with, let's say, setting expectations. But that's really what should be done throughout the whole project.
Okay. Josh, you've already mentioned some of the strategies that you've seen. You've focused on setting expectations as well and making sure you get the use case selected right. Do you think we might turn our attention now to a question that was brought up by a member of the audience, asking us about any recommendations you have when evaluating different providers? Both Barry and Pete have their own companies, of course, and they are technology providers. But we need to help customers choose their partners and their providers so that there is a really a rationale, but also a robust way of evaluating the product proposals. Is there a buyer's guide online anywhere? Is there a pictures or some rankings or ratings of products? Do any of you know of anything like that? Josh, you did a pretty thorough analysis when you worked on the roadmap, the technology maturity roadmap for the U.S. Navy. Could you tell us how you approached that in terms of matching the technology or the vendor to the use case?
Sure, I can talk a little bit about choosing that. And I also guess the last question we talked about risk mitigation strategies. I think one important thing that I think was alluded to in this idea that Pete covered, especially of feedback loops and iteration and user feedback and that sort of thing, is the idea that when we start a project or a pilot, we have some assumptions that we've made about how it will be used, how well it will work, and that sort of thing. So I think just trying to articulate assumptions, and when Pete said start slow, I think that's good advice. I think maybe slow might not be the right word though. I would say start simple and start with the assumption in mind that you're trying to test with the pilot, and so you learn whether that was true or not, and that information can help determine what you do next, that sort of thing. And then as for choosing a best provider, I think this is a very sort of new area, and I don't know that anybody has really started this. This is my opinion. I'm not speaking on behalf of the U.S. Navy, but I don't think anybody's really stood out yet to be the provider of augmented reality. I think that there's various providers that have great aspects of what they're doing, and I think that people just need to continue trying to find a good niche that they can play in, and whether it's hardware, software, whole like mobile device management, AR device management type stuff too is going to be key. I think early on for the Navy, it's going to be small. Nobody's going to be purchasing thousands and thousands of units, whether it's licenses for software or hardware devices or management software. I think so. Keeping that in mind, at least for the U.S. Navy and for the DoD, I think you can't expect huge investments now. What you can expect is to be able to sort of on a on a small pilot basis, test some jobs that can be done with it, and then later on. Now that some people might not realize, but the budget for government appropriations happens, like what we're spending now happened 5 years ago. They budgeted this stuff, so it takes a long time to get big stuff funded, and it takes a long time to get big projects planned and that sort of thing. So, but I think I have a bunch of other Navy folks that I work with. If you think you have a great solution, I know I'm going to get a bunch of emails probably, but we go to conferences, we test things out, and we ultimately when you purchase, you go through federal acquisition regulations. But if your product has a particular aspect to it that makes it unique, then that helps distinguish it from what is a growing field, and I expect will continue to be a growing field.
Okay. Well, thank you. That's a customer centric, a customer perspective. It's very, very valuable. I want to touch on one last question before we end today. A question that was raised is, how do you keep these projects slow and keep iterating when the enterprise that you're working in has a strong demand and a broad and urgent need? They really want to adopt in a big way. How do we manage that the appetite? So it's kind of it's not a problem of as much there's not enough money, nobody understands what it is. The question is the reverse, that we know what it is, we understand the benefits. How can we get it today? Pete, have you run into that in any of your projects?
We have. Some of the issues have had to do with really hardware availability. So I think what happens sometimes is on the digital eyewear side, there's announcements that are made, creates a lot of enthusiasm, and then you go to put your order in, and there's kind of a back order system, so it could take a while to get devices, and it's the whole hype cycle. So there's inflated expectations, and sometimes they're working out the kinks or the bugs when the devices are just first coming out. So there's definitely demand out there, which is great. Setting proper expectations is part of that, and then I think so many people would like to see this technology really move into the mainstream, and obviously we're talking about enterprises now, but some things start in the enterprise and then they work their way to consumer, and I think we'll get there.
Indeed, indeed. So it's really exciting, and I want to thank you, the panelists, Barry, Pete, and Josh, for joining me today. I'd also like to thank the attendees for your attention. I will make this webinar available as a recording on the area YouTube channel, so you will be able to review it in the future and share it with others in your organizations as you need. Thank you again for your attention. Great subject. Do tune in. Stay in touch. We will be having another webinar in just a few weeks, and regularly be posting information on our website. That's www.thearea.org. You can also go there to put your email address in to receive our newsletter and notifications of future webinars. Thank you very much, everybody. I really enjoyed our session together.
Thanks, Chris.